To start with, obviously, right now we have the COVID situation worldwide. I'd like to just hear from you the current situation in Indonesia. Shinta, how hard hit is Indonesia? How is the economic situation, and which sectors are hardest hit right now?
Yes. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for this opportunity. Actually, the pandemic effect is very bad for Indonesia, obviously, but I would say that it's still better than most countries in the world. If we look at Indonesia quarterly growth throughout 2020, it's still better than the quarterly growth in developing countries in the world, including average Asian. Indonesia do not have, of course, any major social unrest, so we're particularly quite stable politically. There are a high level, of course, of business closures. So during the pandemic, whether that's temporary or permanent, and also impact in unemployment, because our employment rise from about 5.23% in 2019 to about 7, even more in 2020. And we call there are people who are maybe not terminated because the companies will not be able to pay their termination package, but many are not getting any compensation. So this means that we have quite a huge number of unemployment. And we are also, the impact is also a lot on the informal sectors, because Indonesia, actually the structure of manpower, 55% is in the informal. Due to COVID, it rise to about 70%. So this is really, of course, a concern. And if we look at also the macroeconomic indicators, actually we are still quite stable despite decreasing debt to GDP due to pandemic subsidies and stimulus. Indonesia is especially successful in controlling the non-performing loans and foreign capital flight from Indonesia through various mechanisms. And Indonesia's stock market and banking is also quite good. This significantly reduced the shocks to the overall economy during the most vulnerable moment in the second quarter. In fact, the rupiah exchange rate to the US dollar, if we see compared to other major currency in the world, is back to our average exchange rate in 2019 within 6 weeks after the exchange rate fatality in March and April. And Indonesia's stock market has been back to its 2019 performance by January 2021. So if we look at Indonesia year-on-year economic growth, yes, we dropped, obviously, and the lowest quarter was in the second quarter, but I think we will close the year possibly by a deficit of about 2.5%. And the business hardest hit, if I have to say, would be the MSME. And this is something, if we look at, we had a 1998 crisis. At that time, actually, the MSME was the backbone of our economy. This time, they really got hit. And of course, if we know on the service sector, like transportation, we talk about tourism, those are really hit. And we have a lot of hotels now still closed, still not able to open and do activities. So currently, I think the situation on the pandemic also is not fully under control, and that's why we have our second wave. And right now, the government is trying to find a way in how to really maximize the health protocol, because obviously this impacted a lot in the rising number of the COVID itself in Indonesia. And I would say there are two aspects that is very important currently in 2021 for Indonesia. One is the vaccine. I mean, of course, that's the game changer. I mean, if we don't do vaccinated significantly to achieve our herd immunity, about 70% of our population, which is about 180 million target, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to continue controlling the pandemic. And of course, that impact tremendously in the economic side. Indonesia also has just recently ratified the biggest, what we call omnibus law, the biggest structural reform in Indonesia. And this, I can talk a little bit more later, but this really create bureaucracy reform and structural reform that we are really overdue. So this is something that we are very much, as business people, we are very much looking forward for the execution of these implementing regulations. Okay. While we're talking about the health side on the control of the pandemic, of course, the recovery of the economy is the most important thing. And we are relying also a lot on the stimulus and what the government is currently doing to push so that we can go back in track.
Dino, I'd like to hear from you. How would you rate the performance of the Jokowi government in dealing with this crisis? And how is his standing in the population?
Well, first, I think the performance is relatively good. When I say relatively, it's because the government at first was slow to respond to the COVID threat. I think they sort of underestimated it, and they did not have enough preparations. So when COVID actually came, they were very surprised, and they did not have the adequate preparedness, in terms of how to test it, how to trace it, how to treat it, how many hospitals would be ready, and what should the doctors know, and so on and so on. So it took some time, but I think the second half of the 2020 things picked up, and the policies, both in terms of public health policy and also the economic stimulus was in place. So on that basis, I think the government has managed the COVID crisis well. The number now is at about 1 million infected cases, but I'm sure the actual number is much higher. I don't know exactly, but globally they say the number is 10 times more than the actual number globally. I wouldn't be surprised if Indonesia is the same thing. First, because we don't test enough, right? And secondly, we don't trace enough. I had COVID in September, Mark, and when I had COVID, not many people asked me who I was in contact with, and not many efforts to chase people that I was in contact with. So we're quite weak on testing, and we're quite weak on tracing. So I think those are the sources of concern, and we have not seen the peak of COVID cases at the moment. There's still a race between the COVID rise in Indonesia, and also the speed by which vaccination can take place. But definitely 2021 is going to be still COVID-19 year.
But the vaccination program has just about started, and it has a very ambitious goal. The Jokowi government wants to vaccinate 180 million people within, I think, 15 months. So hugely ambitious.
1 year,
goals.
Actually, he mentioned 1 year.
Is that achievable?
Well, I hope they will succeed, right? But the only thing that I hope is they don't make the second mistake of underestimating the problem. 181 million people in a country of 17,000 islands and such geographically complex country is really going to be a challenge. And not only that, we will have different vaccines, which will require different refrigerations, different methods of handling, and all to be distributed in a health system which is really unaccustomed to dealing this kind of thing on such a scale. So I predict that the vaccination program will become a very political issue, like elsewhere, like in the United States and like in Europe, whereby every single mistake will become politically exposed, where you will have political controversies here and there, and where you will have more politics than the actual science or technical distribution debate regarding the vaccination. But thank God, vaccine nationalism is not felt in Indonesia. In fact, it's the other way around. The government is very open-minded about it, and we are very actively calling for the fair and equitable access for distribution of COVID-19 vaccine globally, especially to the less developed countries.
Obviously, we don't want to talk about COVID only. What I would like to make with the two of you is kind of get an assessment of the achievements of the government of President Jokowi Dodo. He's entering the third year of his second term. He has a little more than 2.5 years left. Shinta, I would like to start with you. In your view, what are his biggest achievements and where did his government disappoint?
So I think, first of all, we always mention that the biggest achievement in his era will be our infrastructure development. I think this is the first president that actually building physical infrastructure. And you can really see this is not predominantly in the Java, but even in the eastern side of Indonesia. He's been building, whether that's airport or toll roads all over. So I think infrastructure will be really he would be remembered as a president that really has built infrastructure. Now, obviously, now with COVID, with everything, there's things that hinder him to continue accelerate, but it's still in his prime priority agenda. So I think infrastructure development will be something that he has done. I think the second aspect that is very key also that he has been looking into is the bureaucratic reform. And I've talked about the structural reform that has happened now on the omnibus. I mean, this is the first president that actually dare to actually do something this scale, right? And this is huge, humongous. And a lot of even businesses are still questioning whether this can actually happen be implemented properly. Right, but I think at the end we have to really give appreciation for him, the fact that he's there to actually do it, and the law has been ratified. So I'm just giving an example, like the manpower bill that has been forever trying to be revised. This has not been able to be done until now. So it's quite a significant reform. Of course, I have a caveat in terms of the implementation, but at least it's now underway. The third aspect that I would say is very, very important and continue to be important is the human capital development aspect. I think he realized that whatever it is, Indonesia still have problem with manpower because we have basically low-skilled labor, and which if we want to attract quality investment, we need to upgrade our manpower, and this is something that he's been very much focusing, including reskilling, upscaling. We've been doing a vocational program, working with the industry, so a better link and match between education and absorption to industry. And I think this even accelerates with COVID because, as you know, now digitalization is a very, very big part of it. So he's been very much paying attention to this and involving, of course, from us, the industry, but also from the academia, universities, how we can have a better, more comprehensive vocational program as well. And we also talked about, I mentioned about availability of jobs, because at the end of the day, this is an important part. Indonesia has a big demographic bonus, but it can be a liability if we are not able to create jobs. So this is the president who's thinking how we can create jobs, and jobs can be created, of course, also from developing the SMEs. So we can't just be relying on job from the industries that we want to go into labor intensive. But I think the main important is also creating own job or entrepreneurship, SMEs, developing that. So empowerment at SME has been one of his key priority area, and this will, I think, continue to be an important part. And I think the last part that I wanted to mention also is, of course, this is a president who really feel very strongly about, how we can have the inclusivity and equality. And I think Indonesia still have quite a significant Gini ratio, and this is something that he's really trying to how we can improve the inequality. And I think when we talk about the village program, development of the elevating poverty, working for. So he's been very much focused on that as well. So I think that are some of the key areas that I would say be his high. And of course, it will continue. I mean, if you ask about what is the gap, what can he still do? Definitely, all these areas are far from finished. We talk about combating corruption, for example. This is something that is a key element. Sustainability, we've been talking about, incorporating SDG. We talk about climate change. We are talking about green economy. And I think this is something that still needs to be pushed, including also digitalization aspect and technology. I think technology is not about just the digitalization, but also really boosting the innovation and technology.
Dino, when Jokowi was voted into office in 2014, he managed to characterize himself as being a new broom who will sweep away corruption and bureaucracy. Has he achieved or has he lived up to that image?
Well, I agree with Sintha that corruption is the key challenge where the president is still struggling. Corruption is so deep-rooted in Indonesian political system and even cultural mindset that it's really difficult to get rid of it speedily and permanently. Unfortunately, that's the realistic answer. So many people feel that the president could be stronger in addressing the corruption issue, especially because the last legislation that was passed on the Corruption Commission was seen as weakening the Corruption Commission. But having said that, I just want to add more political flavor to what Shinta has said about the political achievement of President Jokowi. I think one of the most interesting thing is that if you see polarization happening in the United States and many parts of Europe and other places around the world, in Indonesia after the last election, things have been really depolarized. Before the election of 2019, I was a bit worried because things were so polarized, right? But after that, a series of things happened that this polarization is hardly felt anymore in Indonesian society. And I think one of the most amazing thing that he's done is the political acrobats, whereas Indonesia now is probably one of the very few countries, if not the only country in the world, whereby you have two presidential candidates and vice presidential candidates, and all of them have joined the same government after the elections, right? So it's very unique, right? But it only reflects his political pragmatism, right? And that also explains the degree of political stability that we have now, and also the degree of depolarization that has really surprisingly taken place in Indonesia. And the other thing that I give credit for the president is the fact that, after 6 years in power, he has successfully maintained his image of being a clean president. Yes, his cabinet have been, caught in some corruption scandals, and a lot of people from the party side have also been caught in corruption scandals. But the president himself is untouchable, and in terms of corruption, he's maintained a very clean image, and there's a very high degree of public trust in him as a clean president. I can't say how important, enough how important this is, because in Indonesian political culture, this is really hard to achieve, right? Maintaining this clean image for 6 years or so. So I think that's a very important thing of his presidency. And I agree also that I think he has been very decisive when it comes to issues of identity and pluralism, right? I think his move to ban FPI, the Islamic organization, and also Hizbut Tahrir was really something that I think no previous governments dared to do. Right? So he's been very decisive on those fronts.
Maybe if you allow an add-on question to that, Dino, we have a question from the audience. Someone is asking, what do you think of these voices who say that the Indonesian democracy has actually been declining under Jokowi? Would you say there's some truth to that?
I agree, because look, the quality of our democracy remains stable, with elections being held every 5 years and so on and so on. Yeah, but the quality of our politics is declining, and there are authoritarian laws that are happening that gives rise to when it is being implemented to these kind of impressions. And Indonesia is a democracy, but we also have our share of demagogues, and we also have politicians and officials who have authoritarian mindset, intolerant of criticism, and so on, right? So these tendencies are always there in Indonesia. They have not been eradicated. And I do see signs that some of these tendencies are emboldening, are growing, right? Not enough to raise red flags over our political system, but enough for us to be more vigilant to protect democracy. I've seen quite a few cases where people are getting arrested just for, posting something that is seen as, insulting to the leadership, and, it shouldn't be like that. I know it's, when you're in public offices and people do things that displease you, in a democracy, you just shrug your shoulder and just accept it, right? But now the risk of criticizing the government is higher now, and you're more amenable to arrest. And as a citizen, as somebody who grew up in the reforms and democracy era, I hope people are more vigilant about protecting our democratic system, because it can be creeping authoritarianism, that's what they call it.
How intensive is the discussion already about what will come after 2024, i.e. what will come after the second term of the Jokowi government?
I think the discussion mainly because he can't run again, right? So there will be there will be a new president. So in that respect, yes, there are obviously candidates already thinking about it, has been put forward in terms of names. But I think at the end of the day, it's still, for 3 years doesn't seem to be a long time. But, people are kind of restrictive. The same names come out, the same political. Indonesia is, of course, politically based on a lot of political parties, right? So, of course, those those are part of the politics, how they're going to move forward, which political party and so forth. But I think I wanted to touch more on what will happen on the economic side, because I think post-COVID, I mean, the question is, when will Indonesia basically recover, right, and move on? I mean, as you know, we have talked about, for example, moving capital city from Jakarta. Of course, now that has to be kind of on hold. I don't think it will happen during President Jokowi's government, but he may want to still, put forward some of the, but it will not really be clear in the government. So that is something that will probably still move on even in the next government. Also, the other aspect that's important is when we talk about Indonesia position right now, we also need to see that the biggest challenge we have as far as our economy is basically our industrialization, because Indonesia is not yet part of the global supply chain. That is our biggest problem. So we are not competing in the same level as our neighboring countries. That's why our president has always been complaining about trade, why we're not exporting enough compared to Vietnam, we're not attracting investment enough from Malaysia, Thailand, he compared in that respect. So we know that this will take time. Industrialization will not happen overnight. We right now, Indonesia is still depending so much. 70% raw materials are still imported. So we are not able to do that economic scale, cost. So this is something that is a big issue that will have to be a priority agenda even in the next government post Jokowi. So I think our industrialization, we talk a lot about Industry 4.0, about all this, but I think our industrialization has to be really key in order for Indonesia to be part of this international trade. And we have, for the first time, now we have quite a number of CEPA, actually, FTA, CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, including the EFTA. And this is actually the first time, right? So we haven't done this for, and that will have to be continued on, because this will definitely, EU, CEPA, it will be tough. We want to complete it, in the next year or two, but it's going to be quite a tough agreement. Even the RCEP, our largest, FTA, just happened. That's already a big achievement. But implementation is our issue. So there is gap in also a lot of the things that's happening. Can Indonesia utilize all this agreement as well in the future? So this is some of the agenda post Jokowi. Despite whoever the government, the president will be, some of this will be continuing to be a priority for Indonesia.
In terms of economic policy and also trade policy, Indonesia so far has been characterized as being rather mercantilist and also protectionist. Do you see that with, as you mentioned, with the signing of the RCEP, with the signing of free trade agreements, do you see that really changing now that Indonesia's economic policy becomes more open and less protectionist?
Yes, I think, Mark. First of all, if we see the FTA and the CEPA, it's all about also the opening market access, right? I mean, of course, there's not just liberalization; it's also facilitation. It's also a lot of capacity building. But basically, the main is opening a market. That means if Indonesia is now negotiating, that means there is a key of opening up. Of course, there are people always say, yeah, but in actuality, you are still protected. So liberalization versus protectionism. Who are you? Now, I want to give you just some share of information. Like now, with the omnibus, we have what we call we used to have what we call the negative investment list. Indonesia now with the omnibus, will no longer have negative investment lists. What we have is priority list. Priority list those sectors that will get incentive. And we basically are open in most of the sectors. So before we closed for, we have about 515 sectors that are being rolled, including being closed. Today, we only have 6 sectors that are completely closed, and that's of course related to sovereignty of Indonesia, but mainly are open, of course, outside of those that are reserved for the small medium enterprises, but mainly it's open. So now you can really see a big change from where we used to have a negative list, and now no longer. We will be open more for foreign direct investment as well. Now, on the trade, I want to just share a few data because according to the WTO intelligence-based database, today Indonesia has about 53 SPS measures, about 25 TBT measures, 2 tariff rate quota. We also have about 85 SPS measure and 105 TBT measure and no TRK quota. So if we compare Switzerland and Indonesia, I will share you the Switzerland number is 6 SPS measure, 68 TBT measure, and 28 TRQ. So we see that both of us actually have much less non-tariff measure compared to, for example, China, that is enforced more than 100 respectively and applied both TRQ and quantitative restrictive. So when we talk about protectionism, what are we talking about? Because we need to really come up with, with data, right? With facts. All 3 countries, EU, US, China, initiate more than 500 new SPS and TBT measure. So this is something I think that we need to really look at with numbers, so that usually when we talk about protectionism, what is this? Of course, each country, especially during COVID, has a lot of non-tariff barrier. Non-tariff measures has increased significantly. But this is happening everywhere. It's not just Indonesia. So I have to say we are very careful when we talk about protectionism. Yes, we have a very large SMEs in Indonesia, large industry. We have to protect also our market because we may be taken advantage because we have such a large market. And this is something we need to pay attention to. But in general, look at the facts. I think that's the most important thing.
Maybe a question to Dino. With the recent signing of the RCEP, what are this is a question from the audience. What are the hopes that Indonesia has in terms of being a member of the RCEP? And what does it mean in terms of its the geopolitical standing of Indonesia, obviously in this great power game between the United States and China? Has Indonesia made a small step closer to the Chinese orbit with this move?
Well, first, we're very happy with the RCEP being signed, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, because it's the world's largest trading bloc. And I know it's not the gold standard. It's been criticized as having, weaker ambition, right? But that's fine with us. I think it will have economic and investment impact on the countries involved. And the fact that it was signed on time, we had aimed it to be signed at the end of 2020. That's exactly what happened at the height of COVID. I think that's really remarkable, right? And I think this is the only major trade pact being signed in 2020. And secondly, look, this is not a China trade pact. I know it has been described by some as being that. No, this was an ASEAN-driven trade pact, right? And there were other competing ideas. And at the time, ASEAN was concerned that the economic gravity would shift to other places other than ASEAN, given these other competing trade bloc ideas. But ASEAN pushed it and succeeded in getting this signed. and it is a sign that ASEAN centrality does work in the economic architecture of the region. And I think the hope is that now that it is signed, let's make sure that the ASEAN countries, especially Indonesia, including Indonesia, can reap the benefits out of it. Because really now that there is concern that everybody wins, but certain country wins more, including China wins most, right? And we got to make sure that that's definitely not going to happen. That we want everybody to win, at least more or less equally in terms of being able to reap benefits from the trade pact. But I got to be honest that the position of China in Indonesia have changed dramatically in recent years. There was a survey that we did, my organization did recently, and the survey found that to Indonesian public, the most impactful country is no longer the U.S. In the previous surveys, the answer had always been the U.S. Now, the Indonesian public believes that the most impactful country is China, right? And they also believe when they ask them who's going to be the most impactful country in the next 10 years, the answer is still China. In the past survey, it used to be the US, right? So the position of China in the Indonesian political and social psyche have changed. And I think Indonesia also sees that our economic future is really tied with China. It doesn't mean that it's tied less to the United States. It doesn't. The United States remains important. But there's a certainty to the notion that Indonesia's future development and economic progress, China will become a big factor of it, because China is already the largest trade partner. Chinese tourists are the largest source of tourists in Indonesia. Chinese investment is growing. It's already number 3, and I think it will soon become number 2 and number 1 investors in Indonesia, and so on and so on. Right? And we welcome it so long as we have strategic autonomy. So close economic engagement with China, fine, but we have to maintain our strategic autonomy in that process.
Now, you obviously were the Indonesian ambassador to the United States during the part of the Obama administration. Now we have a new administration in Washington. You recently wrote, Dino, that Washington should be less patronizing and less judgmental towards Indonesia, towards Southeast Asia. What are your expectations and your hopes in terms of the new administration that has taken over in Washington?
Well, look, United States has a problem in terms of engagement, in terms of consistency, right? And I'm saying something that I think people know about, right? So the United States needs to return to its active mode in Southeast Asia, in the Indo-Pacific. And when they come in, they need to listen. And not just listen, but listen well. Yeah, there's a difference between just listening and listening well, right? And they got to show up, right? They don't show up often enough. And they have to start reducing this rivalry thing that most Southeast Asians are not comfortable about. Rivalry with China, right? We understand that this thing's going to be going on for a while, right? But, we got COVID to worry about, right? And, Southeast Asians, we got a lot of problem among ourselves, right? Indonesia used to hate Malaysia. We used to have a confrontation with Singapore, right? But what happened? We overcame that, right? We changed rivalry with, healthy cooperation. And we found areas of cooperation that we harness, right? I'm sure there's plenty of areas that the United States and China can begin to work with that would alter their geopolitical rivalry to some degree. Climate change, North Korea, terrorism, Afghanistan, maybe, and other places. So that's what we would like to see.
Obviously, we've talked a lot about the internal challenges of Indonesia. We see the place of Indonesia in in its proximity to China, its relationship with the US. Towards the end, I'd like to hear from both of you what role and what's the importance of Europe in this big picture, and what are your wishes towards Europe in terms of the relationship between our two areas, so to say. Maybe Shinta first.
Yeah, I think, to be frank, Mark, Indonesia trade and investment with Europe is overshadowed in value by ASEAN countries, China and the US. However, I think Indonesia long-term economic aims are really sustainable economic growth and deeper integration in global supply and value chain. This means that Indonesia needs to diversify our economic partners to really include as much strategic partners as possible in the global economy. Now, given Europe's contribution to global trade and investment, of course, European countries are naturally considered as Indonesia's strategic partner in this goal. And I think this is why no matter what happened in the global political and economic competition landscape between China and the US, Indonesia will still pursue FTA with the European countries, be it in the EU as well as EFTA. So Indonesia FTA with EFTA specifically is especially important because of its high connectivity and policy conformities to the EU, and the fact that EU shares of the intra-regional trade is dominated by its bilateral than cross-regional trade. In this regard, Indonesia FTAs with EFTA allows Indonesia, I think, to kind of set a firm and stable foot in the European market as a whole without the need to depend only on the GSP that maybe can be taken away at any time in the future, especially now when Indonesia growth is steadily moving to be more an upper middle income country. And when our FTA with the EU is still in the making, FTA with EFTA also allows Indonesia to speed up our own domestic economic reform and negotiation process of other more ambitious FTA like EU. So with the FTA with EFTA countries, Indonesia, I think, will be able to also explore more economic opportunities that we have never, explored before, and tap really into each EFTA country's economic prominence for our economic development purposes. I think clearly this is the way to go, and I also want to mention that we are really looking forward that Indonesian position with EFTA countries, and especially Switzerland, which is a very big part of this, will really shift, because right now we are lagging behind like Thailand, for example, which export much more to you. So a lot of, I think, this aspect will be a new opportunities for also businesses from both sides to really maximize the advantage of having this agreement as well.
Thank you. And as a last word, Dino, what are your views on Europe? What are your hopes in terms of the relationship between European countries such as Switzerland and Indonesia?
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk on the palm oil side. I know in this Indonesia-Europe comprehensive economic partnership is an issue, palm oil, and it can be an emotional issue. When I met with some French legislators, that's all they asked me some years ago. So, look, I want to say this. There is definitely resentment in Europe about the deforestation that has happened in Indonesia. And I can tell you, in the 70s, this was actually government policy. The government was really giving incentives for companies to chop as many forests as possible, right? Because, they were seen as a source of economic growth, So that was really a bad time. And deforestation happened a lot. And encouraged and supported by the government as government policy, right? And this was before these environmental issues became the theme of the day, right? But look, fast forward 30, 40 years later, right? And I know this because I used to work for the presidential office, right? Things have really changed, the government attitude have changed. Deforestation, there is a moratorium on deforestation. We recognize that we have an environmental and climate responsibility. And the industry has changed too. That is very important. I met with the second generation, for example, of big palm oil plantation companies. Their kids went to school in the United States, were very sensitive to sustainable issues. And they have done really some major turnarounds to how the country is being run. I'm talking about Sinarmas or the Tanotu Group, the APP and others. All they think about is now reforestation and conservation and sustainability, right? So my point is this: look, this debate is going to go on, but unless you understand and see that the industry and the government is trying to do the right thing, you're not going to have much of a debate. The only thing we ask is, have an open mind and appreciate the things that are being done positively and criticize things that are not being done adequately, right? But that fairness has always been part of the European ethos, right? And we ask you to be open-minded and fair when you deal with this issue, because there's some degree of politicization on this issue. There are certain groups that whatever we do is always wrong, and they always try to demonize us on this issue, and I think that's unfair, and I think there's definitely space for greater understanding and appreciation for the efforts that the honest efforts that the government is trying to do, despite the shortcomings that may be there. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you. And we have to take that as a closing statement. Thank you very much, Dino. Obviously, many topics that we were not able to go deeper, but I hope we were able to touch some of the most important topics that are important for Indonesia right now and are important for our relationship. To the audience, I'm sorry I could not take all the questions. Obviously, there were many more questions. I've tried to web in some of your questions into our conversation. But first now, please, from the audience, please join me in thanking with a virtual applause, in thanking our two panelists, Shinta Widjaja Kamdani and Dr. Dino Patti Djalal. Thank you very much for taking your time and for your openness in this discussion. That was very helpful for us.